Welcome to the Excellence at Work podcast, where we explore the strategies and best practices that drive business success. I'm Rachel Cook, COO of Brandon Hall Group and the host of our podcast, along with members of our executive team. In each episode, we'll dive into the latest trends, insights, and real-world examples from some of the most exciting leaders from organizations worldwide. Be part of our journey and learn from the best as we discuss innovative approaches and cutting-edge technologies for talent management, learning and development, leadership, diversity and inclusion, and more.
All right, welcome to this episode of the Excellence at Work podcast. I'm David Wentworth. I'm the Managing Director of Learning and Talent here at Brandon Hall Group, and I am thrilled to be joined by Melissa Loble, who is the Chief Learning Officer at Instructure. Hello, Melissa.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Very happy to have you, and excited to talk about. We're going to dive a little bit into the conversation around skills today. I think it's a very important conversation and one that's being had everywhere you turn at various different levels. And I think in talking to you previously, you've got a really interesting take and the approach to this that I think is going to be really, really important to discuss. Before we go right into there, I always like for folks who join me on this to talk a little bit about how you personally got here, right? So let's talk a little bit about, sort of your career, your work in this space, what brought you to talking and thinking about how people learn and grow. And then we can work our way up to what makes this moment in time so unique and special.
I love that. Thank you for asking. So throughout my career, I've always grounded perhaps my own personal and professional experiences in teaching. My mother was a teacher, and just this idea, though, not necessarily, although I love helping others, but this idea of helping connect the real world or the context or even how you might apply what you learn to how you actually teach something has always been super appealing to me. Maybe I'm a little bit of a nerd that way. And so throughout my career, I've taught in a number of different contexts. In fact, I started in the the K-12 classroom. I moved into higher ed. I've led educational technology over the years. I spent a lot of time in the corporate space, as I am now. But throughout that, the thread is this idea of how do you create moments in people's lives, whether they're single moments or continuation of moments that are applicable and meaningful to them when they go try to apply what they've learned from those moments in other parts of their lives. And so probably most recently, what's really drawn me to the skills work part of my role, and as Chief Learning Officer, I'm thinking both internally about how do we develop our employees, and I'm also thinking externally around how are we bringing thought leadership out around that development. The piece about skills that attracts me the most and I'm connected to the most in my history is I've taught for a number of years in a continuing education program for adult learners looking to transition their careers into the teaching and learning or the instructional design space. And what's been fascinating for me, it's less about the evolution of the content, although it certainly has, but it's more about what creates the aha moments and when students come back to me and say, do you know that doing this project in your class actually helped me get this job? It's piecing apart how that actually happened and why that I think I'm just so captivated by. So that's been the kind of the theme of my entire career, is thinking about how to bring people or how to connect people to what makes them personally and professionally fulfilled and successful.
That's fantastic. And I think, we need more nerds in everything, because I think once all that means to me is you've found something that you're passionate about and and you've decided to pour your heart into it and know a lot about it. It can be anything. And it doesn't make it not cool. I think that's the problem is, we don't have enough people that have poured themselves into one specific area. So I think be nerd proud, right? And
I love it. Thank you.
And the other thing to me too is you hit on something that it's sometimes I have these moments of, wow, it just seems so obvious and we don't talk about it enough, but we've all experienced it ourselves. We've seen other people experience it sort of on an individual level of when somebody actually applies something that they learned. It doesn't have to be in a work setting, just in life, right? Where I learned this thing, and not talking about, say, I'm literally doing the thing while watching a how-to video. I mean, you learned something, and then somewhere at some future point, you use that in that moment where you go, I got to use that, and I learned that thing, and I put this into, and isn't that what we're all trying to do here? Like, isn't that like the stuff that we're doing as learning professionals? If we're not creating those moments for people, then what are we doing? right?
I could not agree more. And it's not only is it just personally fulfilling to have people be able to achieve those things or use those moments, it also just helps us. They're like tiny experiments, right? Of,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that worked. That I need to be thinking about how I deliver learning in that way, because that really made a connection for that type of person. That's huge. It's like we're constantly evolving or experimenting on our practice when we think about it that way as well.
Sure. And, in this, you mentioned it, I talked about it, the skills issue and trying to get there, and what does that mean? And it's like, it's very strange sometimes. I mentioned at the top that this is a conversation that's being had all over the place, but it's not as though it's new, right? I mean, like, the idea of skills, it's been around forever. We have approached it different ways, we call it different things, but ultimately, essentially is what we're sort of all after. But I do agree that this moment feels different and feels unique. So to that, as these companies are having these discussions, and I think almost everybody to a person will say, oh, we're focused on skills. We're driven by skills. In your experience, do you think that's true? Or is it maybe everybody has sort of their own definition of what that is?
Yeah, I think you've called that very astutely. It's the definition of what skills are. I think it's everyone says, yes, I'm aligned to skills, our learning work that we're doing, or everything that we do to develop our employees or our broader community is all about skills. But when you unpack what skills means, this is where it's very different to people. And I think that's what's creating this urgency in the space right now around, wait, we actually need to be skills aligned. And a lot of people are doing research. You all are doing research around this. What does this mean? And what's been interesting is you see different definitions of skills and you see different collections of skills. So as a real clear example, for some, skills are hard skills or discipline specific skills. For others, skills are more soft or durable skills. Even for others, they're what are called sort of resilience or readiness skills, and they call those a separate bucket. It's even if you start to think about some more traditional learning environments, they'll call them learning outcomes are skills. So I think that's what's the industry's grappling with. They all mean different things. And how do they actually result in an outcomes orientation, right? How do they drive either business outcomes or, impact into the community, whatever the goal is from that learning experience? That's where having to define skills or understand skills is becoming really important, because we're having a hard time as an industry connecting the dot between skills and those outcomes.
I think part of it too is, the kind of organization that we are, Brandon Hall Group, we get asked a lot, as we do any sort of advisory work. I've often heard the question, well, do you have a list of skills that you can share with us, that you could give us to work from? I mean, I could give you a list of skills, but it would be so generic that I don't know how much use you get out of it. So I think this thing that you're describing, it's not so much that anybody is necessarily quote unquote wrong, right? Like the thing that you're doing, it might not be wrong because your organization's definition of skills matters to your organization. As long as you've all decided this is what's important to us, this fits into our mission, our vision, all that, and that is what you're after, then you're not wrong. But that's the issue, is it's almost to a company it's different what it should be, what it is. And so it's the idea of how do we go from a time when we were really trying to nail all this stuff down and get it perfectly defined and set in stone to a different idea of, what is the definition of skills and what are we after? And I think what you're describing too has, at least in the recent past, led to, well, if we just create enough content and build enough libraries and have enough stuff available, we can build any skill imaginable, right? And I think I have an idea, but how has that worked for us?
Yeah. Love that. It hasn't worked for us because we just keep adding to those libraries, right? But we're not going back and asking ourselves, are those relevant today? And will those be relevant in the future? So I'll give you a great example. Some of the work that I'm leading within Instructure is around what does it mean to be a leader in an AI-enabled world? And we could have dusted off our leadership skills. What does it mean to be a leader in our organization? We could have dusted off technology skills that we've said for a long time. But we actually sat in a room as a team and talked through this as an executive team. And in that conversation, it not only highlighted to us, we needed to actually refresh what it meant to be a leader. But more than that, it made us realize that there isn't a pre-diagnosed set of skills that we can just go adopt from someone else, or there isn't something that is a right set of skills. There's actually a contextual set of skills that's meaningful to us and where we are now and where we want to go. and the kinds of employees that, our culture has enabled in our organization. And so all of that is very contextual, very aligned. And then the most important thing is what we've started to talk about is how do those directly connect to what our business outcomes are? So how does having those skills, those leadership in an AI-enabled world skills, how do they connect directly to revenue targets or growth targets or efficiency targets or whatever it might be? That, I think, piece too is really important. It's not just asking yourselves, what do skills mean for you in the particular settings that you're having these conversations and want to develop your employees around, but how do they actually translate into positive impact on your business outcomes?
I mean, it is funny when we say things like that out loud, it seems to be like, oh, well, of course, but it's not often the case within an organization.
No.
Because it isn't easy. It's easy to say, it isn't necessarily easy to do. To make those connections and to measure. But I mean, I think, the things that we're talking about in these approaches are working towards a place that it does get easier. But one thing I want to touch on as we, because as we talk about this and we start looking at the ins and outs and all the mechanisms around this, I think often what happens in the L&D and talent world, whenever we talk about some new thing or the next wave of thinking, we start to lose sight of the learners themselves, the people that we're trying to, that this is all about. We get very focused on, okay, obviously what the business needs. Clearly we need to have that. But there's sort of like this leap between that and the learning team or the HR team. And then, we're going to get together and figure this out. And no one's really sat back and said, okay, do the employees even care about this? Would they define skills this way? If you said the word skill to your employees, how would that resonate? I think you'd find in a lot of organizations, they're like, what are you talking about skills? You hired me. I know what I'm doing. Like, what do you mean skills? I don't know if we've done a great job of bringing the entire organization along on this journey in this conversation. What are your thoughts on that?
This is such an important question. I love that you raised it, because if we think about, I'm a big backwards design person, right? So you think about what is the outcome, and then you build your learning activities to that outcome. But in order to understand that outcome, you have to understand who is actually going to achieve that outcome. And this is where we have to know our learners. We absolutely do. And a lot of learning professionals, they think they know who their audience is or who the learners are. But again, that's another place where we need to be refreshing this for ourselves. So if you look around your organization and you look at things like generations, you might actually have generations of employees that span 3 to 4, maybe even in some cases 5 generations. There's good research around generational differences that can give you nuances around, do they want to engage in video? Do they want to be experiential? Do they prefer structured linear experiences? It's not a hard and fast science, but there's enough to start to go on that you can start to look at that part of your population. You also have to look at function within your organization. So what a sales team may need is going to be very different than what a support team may need. How you both engage them and motivate them, but also how they want to engage and learn. And I'm not saying everything has to be hyper-personalized, although I do think we're going that direction. It's going to take us time to get there. But just even writing on paper, I tell my students often this, think about you're writing a movie and you're going to define your audience, right? Okay, so you're going to craft this screenplay, write down on paper, who is your audience? Who do you want coming to see that? And who do you want to leave feeling impacted by that? If you do that in your organization, you look at generational preferences, roles, all of those different pieces, then you can start to set the stage for what does the learning need to look like? What do those experiences need to look like? And what is going to be meaningful? Do we talk about skills or do we not? Do we talk about empowerment or growth or what motivates them to engage? Then you can start to really create a structure or a frame for the learning that you're then building.
Yeah, I mean, that respect for the audience is so important in that, however you want to define it, you have to be transparent and be able to articulate to people, this is what you need. This is what we need from you. This is what you need. Whether we're saying, oh, you're learning XYZ skill and it's a durable skill and it matters, somewhat important, but it has to be done in the context of why does this matter, to you in your role and who you are in the organization. But I think, we get swept up in conversations like these and then we get too far away, I think, sometimes from that. And I think, we saw it all the time with learning technology and, you are a learning technology provider, you know how this goes. It's a lot of time and energy was spent on ease of use. Okay, for who? with the ease of use for a long time was for administrators and learning. It's like, well, okay, what's happening on the other end? What's that like for the learner? Are we even thinking about that? And there was a huge, oh, wait a minute, we shifted and went back to, let's figure out how to make it easier for the people using it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a really interesting conversation happening in this space too around cognitive challenge or cognitive struggle. And so I love your comment about ease of use, because we also have to think about, yes, we want to deliver easy, efficient learning experiences for sure, because learners they have busy days. Most organizations do not segment out learning time, which I think is a mistake. We need to give our employees the space to be able to engage in the learning we want them to learn. But more than that, there's this, is ease and efficiency always the best path? Or there's, like I said, a big dialogue, and it's coming because of some of the issues that AI has surfaced. Is it good to have cognitive challenge or struggle in this? And that can be important. And not all learners, as you think about your audience, they're not all going to come to you and say, I want things to be hard. A lot of times they're going to come to you and say, I want things to be really easy and just help me get these things so that I can go be successful or get my promotion or do this different role that I want to do. But that doesn't always develop the skills that we're talking about. So I think we have to be also a little bit careful, like you said, around how and where we lean and who are we designing for, because there are places where it is actually meaningful to have, or potentially meaningful to have, challenge or struggle, because it actually gets learners there, but they don't understand that's what's going to get them there, because they're not reflecting on themselves as learners or aren't the nerds that we all are. So yeah. I think it's that audience piece again, but also that understanding who and how we're designing for, whether it's the technology behind it or the content or the learning experiences or all of the above.
Yeah, so many times we've talked to companies who are like, well, this particular course gets great smile sheet scores, so we're going to invest in that one because people love it. And people are giving this one sort of middle grades, and maybe they don't like it so much. Okay, did you look at the outcomes at all of either of the things? Yeah, this thing was super easy. And so people are like, oh, it was a breeze. I clicked through it. No problem. The thing you wanted to happen isn't happening. Meanwhile, the one that they were struggling through, they had to think through, and now all of a sudden they're doing things differently, and
yes.
Yeah, you're spot on with that. You're right that there's we go a little too far on the ease of use path of like, let's just make it as frictionless as possible. And it's like, well, okay, from a logistical standpoint, technology standpoint, yes, let's reduce all friction. But when it comes to maybe thinking and solving things, maybe let's have some friction there. That's an interesting point. So actually, though, that kind of gets me to something, because that gets to the whole, okay, completions, that's an important piece of data to have, but by itself tells you absolutely nothing, like just literally absolutely nothing. So whenever I have that discussion with folks, like, oh, hey, look, smile sheets, completion rates, good stuff, important data to have, easy to collect, useless if you don't do something with it. So then they say, okay, well, then what should I be measuring? And it's like, okay, again, we're back to this, what matters to you, right? So like from you, when you're asked that question, what should we be measuring? What's your response to that?
Yes. We should be measuring impact on the organization. And I'll give an example. So for years, even in my own organization, we have quarterly check-ins. Again, I sit on our executive team, so I'll use this as an example. We have quarterly check-ins for some of our compliance, right? We're SOC 2, ISO, right? So you would get the email and it would say, please go complete this course. This is part of the quarterly check-in for this certification. Well, that tells me nothing as an employee of why does actually what's in that certification matter for my organization, right? Like, why do I care about my cybersecurity practices? Or, do I have the right kind of strength in my password? Like, you're not helping me understand how that will actually help me better contribute to my organization. And I've watched us in the last year and a half shift towards, we are engaging in this because this is how we are able to grow or drive these outcomes in the organization. Or this is how we're creating an environment that you all feel safe and secure in, or you all feel like you can do your best work in. When you start to change that narrative, it engages people differently. You go into the learning thinking, I'm actually here because I want to be able to contribute more effectively, not because I'm told to do this because this is a quarterly or annual certification, or because I need to complete this as a checkbox for a pathway to something else I want to do. So I think the way we have to talk about this differently as an organization, and we do it in and out of learning. So of course it needs to be aligned in the learning. We need to, create that real application that you were mentioning earlier, but it needs to be throughout all the things we can do. If we're always having a compliance conversation, that's not actually telling us why is compliance meaningful to the work we do and how we serve our customers. So we've got to change the narrative in general. And then I think it starts to set the stage for a different narrative in the learning experiences in and of themselves. And we can use that larger cultural experience of learning. Like, we care about learning here, and we're going to show you very explicitly how learning or what we're doing connects to our success and your success. That creates a different space for learning.
For sure. And you've pointed out probably one of the biggest stumbling blocks for organizations when you mention compliance, because it's one of those things that's it's everywhere. Every organization has to deal with it to some degree. And it's traditionally been boring, not good, it's a necessary evil, whatever you want to call it, all the things, right? But almost everyone has to deal with it. And it's typically an employee's first experience with learning too, right? It comes as part of the onboarding. And so now you're setting somebody up from the get-go of like, look, well, you're not going to like this, but just do it. And it doesn't have to be like that. And all these other things that we're trying to do from a learning perspective, they're almost all applicable in a compliance space too, right down to what you mentioned. You don't have to say, oh, you have to do this or else, right? There's whatever compliance issue that exists, there is a business reason behind it, whatever it is. Even if it's a government regulation, there's still a business reason behind it. And so if you can say, look, this is why this is important. I always drop my example of something like, forklift certification, right? So, you could, why are we doing forklift training at this company? And it isn't just because, well, we have to, and you're in trouble if you don't. It's, hey, we'd like it if people weren't running into each other in the warehouse with forklifts. We would like it if our product wasn't getting damaged. We would like it if, and so these are the things that we're after. We're making ourselves safer, more efficient. We are now an employer of choice because the forklift drivers want to work at the place where they're not getting chased down by rogue forklifts every day. And, there are these business drivers of why this is important. You can apply it to almost everything, but because it's considered compliance, everyone just goes, all right, well, we just have to do it. And then, like I guess you were saying, you've set yourself up from the get-go. You're now in a compliance mindset, and people have relegated all learning to that compliance place.
Yeah, I love the forklift example, and you're absolutely right. It's a culture shift, and it's a mindset shift that has to start from the beginning. But the good news is, I will say, you can evolve that. You can change that. So let's say you've had a history of that. There are ways that you can change that mindset, change that culture, and you just do it, one piece at a time. But what I always recommend is create what I call a learning manifesto. For those of the listeners that remember Jerry Maguire and, his men, yep, exactly. So I think about that, and you want something similar, and it doesn't have to be so declarative, but what does learning mean for us in this organization? What are our non-negotiables? Is it always, and it's not the same for everybody. It's not so generic. It can be, is it always contextual? Is it always engaged with customers? It can be a lot of different things for people. Is it, personalized? There's all sorts of pieces to it, but you have that manifesto, and then you can slowly use that in various areas of your business. It can start to build the foundation for what does new learning look like in certain departments that are taking on more discipline specific, experiential learning activities in action. It can then guide, what does that forklift training look like, right? Not all forklift training has to look the same way. It could look very differently, and that manifesto can guide it. But I think starting with something like that about what do we believe learning looks like? What do we believe, we want our employees to understand about themselves as learners? And you accept that, and I think this has to be accepted at the executive level, then you can just start to see the benefits of that trickle throughout the organization. And you can make a slow change if you aren't an organization that has started from a place, that started from a compliance place. This is how you can start to make that shift. You don't have to overnight change dramatically.
Yeah. And so that kind of brings us around to about change, right? And how it is, it almost all the time is somewhat well, at least when it's chosen change, it's incremental. Sometimes there's change that isn't chosen, isn't so incremental. But that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges for companies is they start to think of these big issues, and they go to conferences and they talk to folks like you, or they see someone speak and oh, this is great. I want to change our entire philosophy. And then how do you do that? It's so big. And so when we start talking about from the beginning, the mindset around skills, this idea of how do you think about skills? Or do you as an organization want to start to develop skills in a more strategic way, start developing more strategic type skills, right? If you're going to change that, you're going to change the way that you think about the learner as an audience. You're going to change the things that you measure for success, right? All of a sudden this thing is building up. And what are your suggestions for like, okay, well, how do you take a step, right? You say it's about that, right? It's about one step at a time. How do you take that step? Who owns it, and how do you make those steps?
Yeah, I think that incremental change can be really important. And it depends on who's excited about that change, but you need to start with somebody that's passionately excited about those changes. If you're mandating those changes and it's getting handed to you as an employee from someone else, and you're not passionate about it, I will say it's going to be really hard to actually implement that change. You're going to go operationally or very practical, and it's not going to show up with the same meaning behind it. So who does it is a good part of that question. I think, the chief learning officer is more and more sitting at the executive table, directing more than just learning, but really a part of the overall corporate and strategy and vision. That person can be part of this change. It can be any individual department can actually be part of this change that's just saying, you know what, I want to see something different in my teams and my employees, and I want them to be more engaged with learning, and I have these outcomes that need to shift. So I always say start with either a single department or a single team even to experiment with some of these practices, or start with one of those many things that you could do. So I'll give two examples. On this, start with a department. So our customer success teams are realizing that they need to be connecting with our customers a little bit differently. Our customers are coming with a different set of needs and questions, given where the state, we serve the learning industry. So given where the state of the learning industry is, we're having lots of conversations, right? As a learning industry, it's kind of a pivotal moment. So our customer success team needed to have different skills to manage those conversations. Well, so we started with that department and said, okay, the outcome is an improvement on the conversations having with the customers that will ultimately impact CSAT in one subset of our customer success team. So we're going to start there. Now, how do we start with culture or that manifesto just with that one team? And then how do we work through what learning shows up like so that it actually gets to that outcome? So that's the department single team example. The company example, for example, we decided to start with from an AI development perspective. Right? We know we have to enable all of our employees, but we decided as an executive team, we are going to start with just our leaders and our senior leaders. And our head of HR is leading incredible work around, and this is where that leadership conversation started to come up earlier around what does it mean to be a leader in an AI-enabled world? And we're being very targeted and very specific. But the foundation to that is we've established a learning council in our organization that's building that manifesto. So that manifesto, the first place it's going to show up is in what does it mean to be a leader in an AI-enabled world. So you can kind of go down both paths or either path to just step yourself into some of these changes. And then the hope is the passion and excitement and engagement gets other people's attention. And they're like, oh, we should apply that same framework to this project. Or, oh, this department's now really interested in how that customer success team has improved their CSAT or their conversations so quickly in such a short period of time. I want to apply that to my, sales team in this way. So I say it depends on where you're starting, but pick small and pick passion.
And you're in a unique position because obviously you're describing what's going on internally, the way you're approaching it and so forth, but you also have insight into many different organizations. And I think like your clients would probably be somewhat of a self-selected group in that they're probably all at least starting to think like this, if not somewhere down the road. So in your experience of looking at how some of your clients are doing things, obviously you don't have to name any of them. I'm just curious to know, what are you seeing when you see companies that are doing the things that we're talking about and they're doing them and they're getting it right to a degree? What are some of the hallmarks or unique things that you're seeing from them?
Yes, it's such a great question. So with the customers that we're working with, and even just I'm lucky to be able to be engaged in conversations in larger settings around this. There's a couple of things we're seeing. The first is We talked about skills at the very beginning of this conversation. Moving beyond job to skill mapping. We need this, right? We need that architecture in our organizations. Many have it. Unless you're a smaller organization, you may not have started there. Okay, yes, we need job to skill mapping, but then what we need to do is take it the next step and map those skills related to those jobs into career ladders. And then we need to fold those into the one-on-one conversations, the coaching conversations that managers are having, and then also the alignment to learning so that you can see it play through and the employee gets the contextual understanding of that skill in the context of a larger career ladder, in the context of the everyday work that they're doing from a manager employee perspective. So that's one place we're seeing that job architecture extend out into a learning culture in the organization. The second thing that I'm seeing with customers is this idea, this again, shift. We've talked about it from compliance to outcomes. And baby steps into, yes, they still need to do some of the compliance work because it's a big shift to move that shift, but baby stepping into how we talk about it, like I said before, but even more, baby stepping into what is the delivery of those experiences look like? How is it different? Instead of the same content every single year, how are we engaging our employees rather than just an asynchronous online course and that's all they're doing? How are we creating a more experiential learning opportunity around that compliance piece? So again, changing up the forklift training. We're seeing people experiment there, starting with some of their compliance areas because those are things that they know they have to do, employees have to do, and it gives them a way to start to experiment. And then the third thing I would say that we're seeing customers do, and even just I'm seeing in the broader community, is thinking more about personalized learning. But I'm going to define what I mean. Personalized learning meaning not adaptive. We often think of personalized learning as adaptive learning, which is amazing. I love it. I love the ability to think about that, personalizing it to the individual learner. I mean more personalized learning to the subject area and the learner. So for example, we're seeing more scenario-based, simulation-based learning. AI is unlocking the ability to create a lot of content. That's what's held back scenarios and simulations for so long. They're just so time consuming to build all of the content. And it's really complex to create the pathways and arcs within those things. But AI is actually really good at that, especially if you have a fixed set of content. It can really create all sorts of permutations. And so that's where we're seeing, for example, the cybersecurity training may look one way for the sales team and a different way for the customer success team. And AI can build your content in that. And now you're delivering a step towards like really personalized learning because it's personalized to my role and that subject area. So it's in the next place that we're seeing our customers experiment.
Yeah, I think that's true too. You know, when a lot of those sort of role play scenario type learning experiences started to come around before there was wholesale AI available, they were pretty amazing then. But then you would see like the branching and everything, the limitations of, well, you can only put in so many responses. And now it's getting to the point where it's almost limitless. To what you can give it and what it'll give back. So that's been fascinating to watch. So I'm really glad you sort of brought up AI here and there because it wouldn't be a podcast if I didn't ask a question about it. So I have to, and I will. But I think I want to ask a slightly different question. So we talked a little bit about content creation, which I think is happening a lot, and that's people are seeing some success there. We also talk a lot about AI in terms of automations and efficiencies and improving productivity. But I'm curious, and I'm hoping listeners would be too, especially from a learning and talent perspective. What are you thinking about how companies can and maybe are embedding AI in ways that actually help you better understand and develop and retain talent, the things that we're trying to do, right? So it isn't just help me build this course faster, right? What are some of the ways that AI can actually help us do these bigger conceptual things that we're trying to do as learning and talent professionals?
Yes. That AI enablement piece that's underlined to your question is what I love because it's not about bolting on new AI tools that are the fancy things that we're all looking at, but it's more about thinking, how are we using AI to unpack what our learners need and how are they successful? So a couple of things that I think we can be doing or thinking about in practice. One is making sure that your systems that you are delivering your learning, whether it's online, asynchronous or synchronous, or in person, that you have the ability to capture the full experiences of the learners. So you want to get at that data. And a lot of people say, but how do I do that in a class? That's actually really enabled now by AI, because you put your recorder in the middle of the room, and now you use AI to parse out the process, the cognition that you're seeing happen in the physical classroom. So number one is gather the data, right? And make sure all of your technology systems, and then again, the in-person environments give you data, and that you can get at that's meaningful. And then I think you can use AI, and it can be any of the tools that you may be adopting in your organizations. Use AI to then parse patterns out of that and ask questions of that data. That conversational data exchange is really powerful. For a long time, learning professionals, we would all do this. I've done this, where I would stand up, okay, I'm going to show whatever team I'm talking to, here's the graphs of your engagement, and I'm going to kind of align this to outcomes because I'm going to make assumptions that this connected here, and here you go. It's very different, and this is what AI is very good at, and having conversational and targeted questions. Now you have to help people understand how to prompt for it, how to push for objections, how to make sure what's coming from it isn't biased or hallucinating, and you can do that. There's really good practices to do that. But now that you've collected all this data, let's start having conversations around the data, and what doors does it open? Or what does it show where, how does it show where impact is happening and where it isn't happening? So I think AI is important now at two levels. It's captured data in some places, and now it's letting you have a conversation with that data. And then the third place, I think AI can be really helpful. And there's really not anything out in the market per se that's done this well yet. I think we're working on it. We're all digging into this, but this AI coach capacity. But it's so employees, unfortunately, I mentioned this before, don't always have time in their workday to be able to do the learning. So they're going outside of their workday, and sometimes they're even bringing their own AI to this, right? But they're going outside their workday, and they're like, oh, I got to complete this class, and I'm sitting here watching my kids play basketball, and I can sit here and do this class while I'm watching my kids play basketball. Not that I'm saying I suggest that, but it's happening, right? Well, no one in the company is probably on that Saturday ready to help answer questions when they get stuck on something, or they want a better example, or they can't quite work through something, or they've taken the same quiz 4 times and they keep getting the answer wrong. But AI coaching can help with that. So AI tools that are then trained on your company's knowledge base and also sort of your philosophy can then help when employees are engaging, particularly when there isn't another person to sit next to, especially in a remote world, and say, hey, I'm stuck on this. Does this make sense to you? Or I actually think this is wrong. Help me understand this. So I think the AI coaching piece, and we're seeing organizations build those through their use of LLMs. And they're getting more and more sophisticated, building skills, different things like that. That's a way to get at this today. I think there'll be more coaching and coaching tools that are going to evolve that then also help make that gap or that alignment between what you're learning and skills as well. So those are a couple of areas that AI can be used just tomorrow to then better think about your learning practice in your organizations.
Yeah, I think that last bit, I think one of the things that's challenging for folks is you're on the positive thing is, oh, you can now analyze data that you didn't realize existed because it was not being presented as straight up Excel spreadsheet data, right? But then at the same time, they haven't been capturing that historically because there was no mechanism to capture that. So there is nothing to train the AI on to say, this is what's good, right? So we have to temper people's expectations, and they have to not be frustrated with success out of the box, but know that over time, it's only going to be as smart as you let it and, and what you give it. But to me, I think that's the huge opportunity. And as a research nerd, going back to is that thrills me that like, because you can ask survey questions, and survey questions are useful. At the end of the day, you've asked the question, and someone is answering that question through the lens of a survey question. They're not really giving you real life, real time, their experience on this question. They're like, this is my answer. But to just capture data as it's happening, I think is really fascinating. You get way better insight into how things really work compared to some self-reported survey questions, I think. And then AI has really opened the door. I remember trying to slog through research where you'd ask 30 regular questions and only 2 open-ended questions, and you'd spend all your time trying to analyze these open-ended questions because they're very difficult. Now you just say, hey, AI, what's happening across all of these responses? And they can give you an idea of what's happening. So the ability to just really get usable, actionable insights from stuff that's just happening, I think is really exciting.
I love that. Love that you're a research nerd. And you're right. We've got to start somewhere in collecting data because we don't always have all the data. And maybe maybe year one isn't the year where you have enough to see patterns, but at least you have enough to know what more you want to ask.
Mm-hmm.
But I totally agree with you. We do have to temper our expectations on what we can get out of it until we're able to start to collect a base of data. But yes, this idea to capture, I always call it the tissue, right? It's the connective tissue in between things. Mm-hmm. That is so powerful. And that has been long time only something that a human in that moment, in that physical moment can log. And if you don't write it down, it's the gut. It's what feeds gut. Right? It's actually a biological thing. Somebody was telling me about this from a neuroscience perspective. It's actually where our gut pulls that from. To have our ability to just even capture the data from the gut is very cool.
Yeah, and not like have that moment where you realize something's happening, and then the furthest it goes is you tell one other person that I experienced this, so and then it's over.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. All right, so as this is all amazing stuff. As we wrap up, I'd just like to know, if you looking at the next, 6 months to a year, and you can answer this in the terms of you yourself, or you can answer it in terms of, Instructure and the things that you guys are doing. Well, like what's sort of on the horizon that excites you that you're either currently working on or you're hoping to get to work on?
Yes, I'll do one and one. I'll do one for Instructure and one personal. So perfect. For Instructure, I think what excites me is, especially in the next 6 months to a year, is that we are putting agency in the hands of learners, or this is what we're trying to work towards, so that while, of course, the organization is creating the environment in which learning is happening and still creating the content and the structure and the scaffolding, the learner can be very active and centered of that because of the shifts in technology, and can actually start to make choices and have agency over, if I know my career, if I know I want to go here in my career, or I'm exploring these two fields, I can now see what kinds of skills align to those and why, and where maybe I need to take agency to build my own path. So that excites me. This learner agency piece really excites me, because at the end of the day, we have to take action. In order to be fully engaged, we have to make the choices and be action oriented in our own learning for us to fully digest that. So I'm excited about that, right? Those connections, those pathways, and then the ability to make choices around how I might want to move along those pathways as a learner or as an employee. Personally, to me, this is an era, and this spans all education. This is an era where we're finally asking the question of ourselves as humans: how do I learn? And how do I learn meaningfully? And I say that because, so I, similar to this, I host a podcast, and we always ask our guests, what was a favorite learning moment in your life? And they often come back with something that either happened in their late teens, or usually it's in either college or the workplace. And what makes me sad is that they're not telling me a story about when they're 5, they learned how to ride a bike and they fell, and this is what they realized was why they fell and how they changed their behavior, because we weren't aware of ourselves as learners. This is my learner nerd in me. But what we're now asking people to do is actually step back. If we're going to ask them to take agency, is to reflect on themselves as learners. How do they learn? How do they prefer to learn? What kind of contexts? It's like a meta level to learning that it's finally acceptable in this space. And I think in the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to be expected to know how you learn, because the world is changing so fast. We're not going to be able to prepare people, even in the workplace, for what your job looks like a year from now or 2 years from now. But what we can do is prepare you to be a learner in that world, so that you can quickly adapt and feel comfortable and have resilience through that change. So to me, this bigger meta question of who am I as a learner, that it's finally an acceptable thing to ask, and it's not just a weird nerdy thing to ask, is what excites me most for me personally.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate your time, Melissa. It's been great. And here's hoping, when people listen to this, they want to reach out and connect to you, because, nerds unite, right?
Yes,
and,
yes, we do.
We'll share more on this, but I appreciate you sharing your insights and your time. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such a great conversation.